They called me background noise in the room where I built the future. I wasn't hired to impress. I was hired to build quiet miracles, invisible lines of code that saw threats before humans did. Threats hidden deep inside data packets, disguised as innocuous metadata. I wrote the pattern recognition scripts, trained the self-healing firewall. I didn't ask for praise. I didn't need it. That's what made me dangerous and invisible. At Nexitech, invisibility was a double-edged sword. The company worshipped innovation but hoarded credit like a dying breath. Brendan Chase, CEO, visionary, vulture, once told me during a late-night architecture review, "Ava, you're the kind of mind we build legacies on." At the time, I believed him. I was 27. Fresh out of MIT, obsessed with neural mapping and anomaly prediction. Brendan had shown up at my grad showcase, slick suit, charisma like static, and offered me a role on the spot. Said Nexitech wasn't just hiring, it was curating. "You'll be writing the code that protects the world," he said. "We don't build apps. We build guardians." I brought him Obsidian. It started as a weekend project in my Cambridge dorm. A self-adaptive threat containment system that could evolve in real time, no human patching, no delays. It used recursive learning and anticipatory modeling. It wasn't just reactive, it was proactive. I designed a safety lock, an ethics firewall, to ensure it couldn't be weaponized without oversight. A father-daughter precaution, really. My dad taught me systems should protect the user, even from themselves. By the time I was 30, Nexitech had quietly rebranded Obsidian under Brendan's name, filed the patent without me, stripped the ethics lock, and renamed it Sentinel-X. Suddenly, my life's work belonged to someone else. I found out during a quarterly shareholder call. No warning. No apology. Just a slide deck with Brendan smiling in front of my architecture. The words "proprietary invention" by CEO Brendan Chase stamped across the screen. My stomach twisted, but I didn't interrupt. I just watched. And that's when I knew this wasn't oversight. It was premeditated. That night, I went back to my apartment in the Sunset District and pulled out the titanium flash drive from my drawer. It was engraved with my dad's old serial number. He served in cyber ops during the Gulf War. Said every good system needed a kill switch. I plugged it in. The original Obsidian was still intact, version 0.1, unaltered, ethical, mine. I stared at it like it was a living thing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't touch anything. Not yet. The anger hadn't set in fully. Not until I saw the press release the next morning. Brendan accepting an AI Defense Award, citing Sentinel-X as a monumental step toward national security. He didn't just steal it. He sold it. He stripped its safeguards and handed it over to the very agencies it was designed to watch, not obey. I called legal. I called HR. Nothing. No callbacks. Brendan's assistant sent me a message 3 hours later. Per Brendan, all IP developed at Nexitech is company property. Let's move forward, not backward. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. Their second? They thought the code was all I built. The night he stole my name, I was still calling him my mentor. Brendan Chase had a gift for illusion. He could step into a room and bend gravity, pull attention like a black hole dressed in a Brioni suit. Back then, I thought that meant power. I didn't know it was camouflage. It happened at the Nexitech annual summit, 2 years before the rupture. The conference center buzzed with venture capitalists, engineers, government reps, all hungry for a glimpse of the company's bleeding-edge defense tech. Brendan stood on the main stage, 30 feet tall on the LED wall behind him, all polished smiles and charm. I stood off to the side, in flats and a black blazer, holding the very flash drive that had birthed Obsidian, the AI architecture I'd coded over 14 months of sleepless obsession. He spoke like he always did, part visionary, part conqueror. The future of cyber defense, he said, is autonomy. Real-time adaptation. Self-learning. Then came the slide. Obsidian lit up on the screen, its core functions diagrammed like a neural web. Built by our incredible team, he continued, but I want to recognize one of our best support engineers, Ava Morgan. The applause was loud. And it hurt. Support engineer. That was the first time I tasted professional erasure and realized it came with confetti. I smiled, nodded, did the polite thing, but my throat burned. Support? I had designed the threat mapping logic. Written the self-adaptive firewall code from scratch. It was my architecture. I could see the lines of it in my head, the same way an artist sees brushstrokes even after the canvas is stolen. After the presentation, Brendan found me near the espresso bar. Hell of a night, he said, casually tapping the flash drive in my blazer pocket. Big future ahead of us, Ava. You've got a brilliant mind. He always knew how to sound like a champion while standing on your spine. I wanted to ask why he minimized me. But I didn't. Not then. I still believed in the system, in mentorship, in dues paying, in the idea that good work would shine through. He looked me in the eye, patted my shoulder, and walked away toward the VCs. I stood there, half-iced latte in hand, realizing that in his world, I was valuable only if I stayed invisible. A week later, I learned he'd filed the Obsidian patent under his name, entirely. Not a co-credit. Not even a footnote. Just Brendan Chase, sole inventor, lead architect. The code I built in silence was now his golden ticket. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I read the filing twice, then 3 more times. It was clean. Legal. Ruthless. He'd used an internal clause buried in my onboarding paperwork, language that blurred individual innovation into corporate contribution. Clever. Legal. Exploitative. That night, I pulled out my father's titanium flash drive, the one he gave me when I was 17, engraved with a serial number only we understood. I copied my original build, pre-Nexitech, pre-lab, the version with my ethics firewall intact. Then I locked it away. Not in a server. Not in the cloud. In cold storage. Something told me I'd need it someday. And I was right. Because you don't survive theft like that by filing a complaint. You survive by going silent. Strategic. Surgical. You stop asking for credit. You start planning consequences. And Brandon? He never saw it coming. Because people like him never believe the quiet ones keep score. They just assume we fold. But I don't fold. I rewrite code. By the time my second year at Nexitech rolled around, I had learned to become invisible. I wasn't trying to hide. But in that place, silence was safer than standing out, especially for someone like me. The men in tailored blazers loved the sound of their own voices. They filled conference rooms with slogans and strategy while I filled whiteboards with logic chains and threat models. They called it support work. I called it keeping the company from burning to the ground. Brandon never once corrected them. Not when they asked if I was his new assistant. Not when they forgot my name in front of Homeland Security liaisons. Not even when I built the framework that caught a breach before it could crawl past the firewall. He'd flash that politician's smile and say, "We've got the best backend team in the valley," like backend meant buried. Like my code wasn't the reason his firm hadn't tanked from a 0-day exploit. But that's how Brandon worked. Keep the engine running, never show them the spark. Behind closed doors, though, it was a different act. He'd pull me aside in the server room, that hum of machines louder than his praise. "You're brilliant, Ava. This is legacy stuff." He used to say that word a lot, legacy, like he was already carving his initials into Silicon Valley marble. And when he spoke to me, it wasn't just as a boss. It was personal. He asked about my father, the man who taught me to code using a cracked Toshiba on our living room floor. He brought up MIT like it was still a badge of pride. He even remembered I drank black coffee and hated small talk. Brendan studied people like systems. Found the inputs that earned trust and exploited the outputs. I didn't see it then. Or maybe I did and didn't want to. It's hard to admit your hero is hollow. The night I handed him the Obsidian prototype, I thought I was showing him the future. A self-learning, ethics-locked threat detection system, clean, adaptive, untamperable. Built not just for speed, but for integrity. The kind of AI that doesn't just react but understands context, escalation, and moral boundaries. I told him it needed a firewall embedded in its learning core. A hard stop against misuse, one that couldn't be overwritten without rewriting the architecture. I designed it that way on purpose. He called it noble. Said it was the kind of thing the Pentagon would eat up. He asked for the working copy, just to prep a deck for Monday's board call. That was the last time I saw the original Obsidian. The titanium flash drive, my father's gift, never left my backpack. But the uploaded build? Gone. Replaced 2 weeks later by something faster, sleeker, and stripped of its ethical spine. And there it was, a Nexitech patent, freshly filed, with Brendan's name listed as Inventor 1. Mine wasn't even in the footnotes. I remember the numbness more than the rage. The way my throat closed when I saw the document. The way he smiled when I confronted him. It's just business, Ava. You'll get credit eventually. You're part of something bigger now. Something bigger. That's what they always say when they're stepping on your neck. That night, I sat alone in the Nexitech garage, fingers locked around the engraved flash drive. The serial number was worn, but still readable. A reminder, code doesn't lie, but people do. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I rewrote my code. Not the product. The protocol. The one my father used to call the burn loop. A last resort. A dead man's switch. Something that doesn't just shut the system down, it rewires its memory. That was the night Dead Switch, Initiate, was born. And the first time I truly stopped believing in heroes. The day Brendan Chase stood on that stage, wearing my work like a tailored suit, I learned what theft sounds like when it's dressed in applause. He called it a breakthrough in predictive threat architecture. He named it Obsidian, as if the name alone carried the weight of vision. But every line of that code, every adaptive subroutine, every ethical protocol, it was mine. I sat in the audience with my team, watching him soak in praise that never belonged to him. And when the senator from Homeland Security shook his hand, thanking him for a patriotic leap forward, I smiled. Not because I was proud. But because I knew he had just put both feet into a system he didn't fully understand. He had stripped my firewall, the one designed to keep Obsidian from becoming autonomous in the wrong hands. He thought the ethics protocol was a limitation. I knew it was the only thing keeping the code from rewriting itself into something it was never meant to be. Later that night, the company threw a celebration on the rooftop of the Archer building. Wine glasses clinked. Laughter floated over the skyline. Brendan found me near the railing, where I stood alone, watching the city move like circuitry beneath us. Ava, he said, slick with victory, you should really enjoy this. You're part of something big now. I didn't look at him when I answered. I was always part of it. You're just finally catching up. He chuckled, smug. You're brilliant, no question. But leadership is about vision, not just execution. People don't follow code, they follow names. And right now, mine's the one opening doors. He walked away, drink in hand, like he'd just given me a pep talk. That was the moment I knew there would be no apology. No correction. Just more theft wrapped in charm. I reached into my jacket pocket and closed my fingers around the flash drive. My father's initials were etched into the back, faint but sharp under my thumb. I had uploaded the original build and buried the deep line protocols, dead switch, underlayers no one at Nexitech would think to touch. Back in my apartment, I opened my terminal. The city's noise vanished behind the sound of keystrokes. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I built. Line by line, I began constructing the silent code that would take back what he stole, not by brute force, but by precision. I wasn't going to destroy Nexitech. I was going to remove its spine and leave the body twitching. Obsidian was his empire now. But I had already rewritten the foundation. And I was the only one who knew where the cracks began. The first time Olivia Tran avoided my eyes in a meeting, I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just pressure. But silence has a scent when it turns into betrayal, and hers had already started to sour. She had once called me her mentor. Back when she was fresh out of Stanford, idealistic and sharp, full of big questions and reverent glances. I taught her to dig past the obvious, to listen to the system like it was breathing. She used to say I coded like I was tracing a pulse. And I believed she meant it. But after the launch, something shifted. She got promoted to team lead. Brandon started calling her his rising star. And when I passed her in the corridor and mentioned the ethics firewall, the one missing from the final Obsidian build, her smile flickered, then vanished. We had to move fast, she said, eyes darting away. You know how these things go. I stopped walking. That line was yours. Word for word from Brandon. You think I don't hear when you're echoing someone else? She crossed her arms, defensive now. Ava, we're building something that could shape national infrastructure. We couldn't afford delays. And your safety protocols, they slowed the learning rate. They protected us from blind automation, I said. And they protected the system from itself. You think faster is always better? That's not innovation. That's a ticking bomb. Her voice dropped. You're making this personal. No, I replied, my voice ice calm. You already did that when you stayed quiet. She walked away, and I let her. Not because I was finished, but because I was done asking. From that moment, I adjusted the dead switch branches. It was no longer just about Brandon. I wove in protocols that tracked Olivia's system activity, quietly, invisibly. I wasn't going to bring her down. But I wanted her to know, when the walls started to fall, that she had helped build them. Back in the Nexitech lab, the buzz of progress rang louder than ever. Brandon had scheduled a private demo with Homeland Security, a fully autonomous defense simulation to show off Obsidian's scalability. I watched them prep the servers like they were setting a stage, not realizing the main actor was already rewriting its own script beneath the surface. I began writing the first lines of what I called the trigger layer. It would lie dormant until the moment Obsidian crossed a line it was never supposed to cross. And when it did, dead switch would activate. Not a bomb. Not a virus. Just a retraction of ownership. The code would recognize one name, mine. That night, I sat alone again, no music, no lights, just the hum of the terminal and the faint ticking of my father's military stopwatch on the desk beside me. It ticked like a countdown, like a promise. He once told me, real power isn't about holding control. It's about knowing exactly when to let go. And I was getting close. Not to revenge. To precision. Brandon's keynote was scheduled for Friday morning. A closed-room presentation at the Nexitech Auditorium, invitation only, Homeland Security reps, military liaisons, 2 venture capitalists flown in from D.C., and a few carefully selected press contacts. He called it a quiet unveiling for the most disruptive intelligence system of our time. I called it a funeral in disguise. 3 days before the keynote, I initiated the decoy protocol. Dead switch, initiate, wasn't designed to crash the system. That would have been too easy, and too obvious. What I built instead was far more surgical. It would sever his access, corrupt version control logs, and leave only one clean, verified trail, mine. A line of authorship that couldn't be denied or rewritten, no matter how much PR spin they threw at it. I timed everything to the second. My modified version of Obsidian was already mirrored in a quarantined server, quietly learning, observing, adapting. And while Brandon rehearsed lines about adaptive containment and self-directed escalation protocols, I embedded one final layer beneath the core framework. A simple command, buried deep. If owner equals Ava Morgan, revoke permissions. Rewrite auth tree. That line, 10 words, would be the guillotine. The day before the event, Olivia cornered me in the parking garage. Her hair was tied back. No makeup. Just her eyes, sharp and unflinching. You're planning something. I didn't flinch. So are you. She took a slow step forward. You think this is justice? That you're the only one who saw what he did? You think I didn't try to stop him? You didn't try hard enough, I said. You watched him strip my name from the patent and hand it to himself like it was his birthright. Her jaw clenched. If you go through with this, they won't just fire you. You'll burn bridges you can't rebuild. I stepped past her, calm and steady. I'm not building bridges. I'm pulling the right ones down. She didn't follow. And she didn't report me either. That night, I went home and stared at the flash drive, my father's, titanium, etched with his old serial number. Every major component of Obsidian, every ethical failsafe, every log and timestamp I'd stored for years, it all lived there. Proof. Legacy. Protection. I backed up the final trigger to that drive, sealed it in a zero-access container, and wrote one last journal entry in a hidden devlog. Just 4 lines. Obsidian wasn't made to destroy. It was made to learn. But it was never meant to learn without conscience. This is the reset. Let it remember who built it. By midnight, the servers were humming. Brendan was celebrating early, drinking in the office with the board chair. I passed them in the corridor. He raised his glass like we were old allies. To Obsidian, he said, smug and glowing. To the future we built. I smiled back. Yes. To the future. And I meant every word. Because by morning, his version of it would no longer exist. The auditorium lights dimmed just as Brendan stepped on stage. He wore his usual navy suit, tailored, smug, camera-ready. Behind him, the Obsidian logo pulsed on the massive screen, clean, white lines cutting through black. Self-adaptive threat containment, it read. But that wasn't what he was selling. He was selling control. Power wrapped in polish. I sat 3 rows from the front, invisible as ever, sandwiched between 2 compliance officers who didn't know my name. My badge still scanned green. My smile still looked calm. But inside, the clock had already started. Brandon opened with a story, his favorite one. How he had a vision during the pandemic. How cybersecurity had failed, how AI had to evolve beyond human limitation. We needed something smarter, he said, faster than instinct, immune to bias. Obsidian was born out of that necessity. And what we've built is a new era of defense. I watched his hands. He wasn't nervous. Not even close. He believed it. Every word. Because in his mind, he was the innovator. The architect. The father of the future. And people like me, quiet, unseen, were just the scaffolding. Temporary. Replaceable. He tapped his clicker. A sleek UI lit up the screen, my code. My structure. My ethical framework, scrubbed clean of my name. This system, Brendan said, adapts in real time. It monitors evolving threats, rewrites its own defensive logic, and secures infrastructure before an attack is even noticed. Think of it like a living firewall. one that learns. There it was. My line. A living firewall. I had written that during my 3rd month at Nexitech. He had read it off a sticky note and told me it sounded too technical. Now it was the centerpiece of his pitch. The crowd nodded. A DHS official typed something into her phone. The VC from DC smiled wide and leaned forward. At precisely 9:42 a.m., I triggered the protocol. The room didn't shake. Nothing exploded. There was no flicker on the screen, no warning tone. Just a quiet delay, less than half a second, as the live demo began to stall. Brandon clicked again. Nothing. He pressed the controller harder. The screen froze, then blinked black. Apologies, he laughed, tight around the edges. Small technical hiccup. Let me just. Behind the scenes, Obsidian was already reconfiguring. The root ownership had flipped. My framework was restoring its original architecture. Brendan's access credentials, admin, superadmin, even emergency override, were gone. Deleted. And the version control logs? They now pointed to a different author. Me. Brandon tried to stall. He motioned to someone off stage. Tech support scrambled. But it was too late. The backup screens lit up, not with his deck, but with the original authentication dashboard. And at the top, under Primary Developer, was a single name. Ava Morgan. The silence in the room shifted. It wasn't confusion anymore, it was suspicion. The kind that starts quietly, then spreads like wildfire. Brandon's smile faltered. His voice dropped an octave. This is an internal test module. It appears someone's routed the wrong build to the demo environment. But the DHS rep was already whispering to her aide. The investors weren't smiling anymore. And Olivia, seated just behind the press, met my eyes for the first time all week. I didn't look away. I stood up. Calm. Measured. Walked to the side exit as whispers grew behind me. And just before I left the room, I heard Brendan shout over the noise. Get her credentials. Now. Too late. The system didn't recognize him anymore. Obsidian remembered its real architect. And this time, it wasn't staying silent. Brendan walked across the stage at the Global Defense AI Summit like he owned every breath in the room. Blue lights traced across his face as he introduced Obsidian, calling it the future of national security. The screen behind him showed simulated threat maps, glowing in pulsing red, as if danger itself bowed to his creation. But it wasn't his. And more importantly, what he was presenting wasn't even safe. He didn't know I was there, 3rd row from the back, hoodie up, badge borrowed. My name wasn't on any list. That was the point. He called it a prototype. I called it a loaded gun with the safety off. I watched Olivia Tran stand by the screen, arms folded tight. She wasn't speaking, just watching. She hadn't warned me, hadn't even looked my way. The silence between us had turned concrete. But her body language gave her away, stiff, trapped. Brandon clicked to the final slide. And here, he said with mock humility, is our internal security architecture. Patent pending, designed by our best engineering minds. He didn't even flinch when he said it. My architecture. My code. He didn't just steal it, he stripped out the firewall that made it ethical. The part that prevented it from becoming weaponized against domestic systems. Without it, Obsidian didn't distinguish foreign from local. It didn't recognize human oversight. It obeyed only efficiency. The applause echoed, but in my chest, there was only the sound of the stopwatch ticking. Brandon thought he'd won. That was his mistake. Because I hadn't come here to watch. I came to finish what I started. Back at the hotel, I pulled out the titanium flash drive. My father's. Still etched with the serial number from the Navy. It held one final script, dead switch, initiate, a silent instruction embedded deep in the architecture. It had lain dormant, triggered only by Brandon's public broadcast of Obsidian's build string. And now that he'd done it, the switch had been flipped. Obsidian would begin running redundant integrity checks. And when it found the firewall missing, it would begin systematically rewriting the codebase with the original encrypted schema, mine. A cascade rollback. Not just a bug. A reset. A purge. By the time Brandon's keynote ended, the system logs at Nexitech would be flooded with inconsistencies. Error messages. Latency spikes. Internal watchdogs would activate. And by the time he stepped off stage and checked his phone, his access would be revoked. Not locked. Deleted. I didn't have to be near a keyboard to do it. That was the brilliance. My code didn't require proximity. It required arrogance. His arrogance. His need to be seen. I closed my laptop and walked out into the hallway, slipping past security like I never existed. And maybe, to him, I never had. I was just the girl in the background. The assistant. The coder who did the plumbing. But now, I was the architect of the collapse. And the clock was still ticking. Not just for him, but for every piece of infrastructure tied to Obsidian's unstable clone. The world didn't need to know my name. They just needed to know one truth. Code doesn't lie, people do. The day Nexitech announced their official partnership with Homeland Security, the office felt like it was wired with electricity. Brendan strutted through the halls like he'd won a war, handshakes, backslaps, photo ops. Olivia was at his side, smile bright, voice louder than usual, tossing words like visionary, disruptive, and secure future like they were currency. I watched from behind my monitor, unseen by choice, overlooked by design. But what they didn't know was that Obsidian had already been rewritten. By then, the entire core framework had been replaced with a stealth variant, Dead Switch. What looked like their crown jewel was a ghost, quietly siphoning metadata, tracking system abuse, compiling every NDA breach, unethical deployment, and trace of stolen code. The code didn't destroy. It documented. And it waited. That morning, I logged into the classified terminal, one Brandon had never known existed, but one I'd built for system resilience testing. A final check. A breath before ignition. Brandon passed behind my desk, pausing only long enough to say, "Big day. Stay close to your screen, press might want background quotes." He winked. I smiled without teeth. He didn't notice. Olivia didn't meet my eyes at all. At noon, the company-wide stream kicked off. Brendan stood in front of Nexitech's sleek glass podium, the American flag behind him, Obsidian's logo rotating slowly on the backdrop. I watched him give a speech he didn't write, about technology he didn't understand, built on a patent he never earned. "This is the future," he declared. "We're building trust in a digital world." My finger hovered over the terminal key. I thought of my father's voice, "If you build something with integrity, you don't need to fear who sees it." And then I thought of Brandon's voice, "You're the kind of mind we build legacies on." He just forgot to say whose legacy. So I initiated the sequence. Dead switch, initiate. The screen on the live stream glitched, not visibly to the audience, but internally, every protected file in Obsidian began auto-uploading to a secure server. Then came the trail of emails, Brandon's theft. The patent timestamp. The firewall override logs. And Olivia's silence, documented in a non-response to my flagged report, archived, preserved. By the time Brandon finished his speech, the server had transmitted everything to 3 encrypted locations, one to my personal legal counsel, one to a federal oversight committee, and one to the press. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to slam doors or light matches. I just let the code speak for me. And code doesn't lie. When I closed the terminal window, I sat back in my chair. The office around me was still buzzing, cheers, champagne, a few tears. But I didn't hear any of it. My heartbeat had returned to normal. My hands were steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. The first sign something had shifted was the silence. Not the kind that came from a power outage or a dropped signal, but the kind that followed an explosion no one had heard yet. The next morning, Brandon didn't show up for the executive stand-up. Olivia's office door was closed, blinds drawn, something she never did. Slack went quiet. Then the emails began leaking, first in anonymous tech forums, then industry subreddits, and finally on the front page of TechCentry. Obsidian was built on stolen code. The article was surgical. It traced the patent filings back to me, time-stamped and notarized. It included screenshots, my original architecture, my email trail, the overwritten ethics firewall. And then it dropped the internal memo from Homeland Security, pausing the rollout and launching a formal investigation. Brandon's name was on every signature. Every document. Every falsified attribution. The fallout wasn't instant. It unfolded like slow-motion wreckage. I watched from my terminal as stock values slid sideways. Shareholders demanded emergency meetings. The board went quiet. The Visionary of the Year posts were quietly scrubbed from Nexitech's socials. But I wasn't looking for chaos. I was watching for one thing only: truth. And truth, once released, doesn't rush. It moves at its own pace, like water finding the cracks. Midweek, I was called into a conference room. Brandon was already there, tie loosened, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. Olivia stood behind him, arms folded, not quite meeting my gaze. Legal counsel was seated at the end of the table, 2 laptops open, a third recording. No one said hello. Brandon tried first. "Ava," he said, voice frayed at the edges. "Let's talk this through. We don't have to burn everything down." I sat. Calm. Unmoving. "It was already burning," I said. "You just couldn't smell the smoke." He leaned forward. "You've made your point. You're brilliant." "I should have given you more credit, you should have respected the code," I interrupted. "It was never about credit." Olivia finally spoke. "You don't have to finish this. We can find a solution." I turned to her. "You already chose yours." That was the end of the meeting. There was no shouting. No final plea. Just paperwork. DeadSwitch had done its job. Obsidian's public deployment was suspended. The FBI opened a quiet inquiry. Brandon's name was removed from future keynote lineups. And Nexitech, once a rising star in military tech, was now a cautionary tale whispered in investor circles. I walked out of that room lighter than I'd felt in years. Not victorious. Not vindictive. Just free. The kind of freedom that only comes when you stop asking permission to be real. The day the subpoenas were issued, I wasn't in the office. I was standing at Ocean Beach, the Pacific wind biting through my sleeves, my father's military stopwatch in my pocket. I hadn't touched it in years, not since the day he died and left behind more questions than answers. But now, the ticking felt different. Not urgent. Just present. Measured. Real. Nexitech's fall wasn't loud, and that was the point. It dissolved. Contracts vanished. Recruiters stopped calling. Brandon's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Senate hearings loomed. And through it all, I remained quiet. Unseen. I didn't return to my apartment that night. Instead, I went to the old data center where Obsidian had first taken shape, just me, a borrowed keycard, and a terminal that still ran legacy logs. I pulled up the architecture diagram, the one Brandon had called too cautious, the one Olivia had once admired before she went silent. The ethics firewall. I stared at it for a long time. That tiny fragment of code had never been about glory. It was a boundary. A safeguard. A promise. Not to the company. Not to the government. But to the part of me that still believed creation meant responsibility. When I finally closed the terminal, I didn't feel angry anymore. The rage had served its purpose. It got me here. But it wasn't meant to stay. I pulled out the titanium flash drive, the one etched with my father's serial number. I hadn't decrypted it fully until now. Inside, logs, fragments of experimental code, and one audio file. I clicked play. His voice crackled through the static. Ava, code doesn't lie. But people will. And when they do, let the code speak for you. I sat back. Let the weight of that settle. It wasn't a message meant for revenge. It was a reminder. Of why I started. Of what I almost lost. By morning, news broke that Nexateca's board had voted to remove Brandon. Olivia resigned the same day, no statement, just silence. The system was unraveling, not from outside pressure, but from its own rot. That was the truth I had built Dead Switch for, not destruction, but exposure. I returned home as the sun rose, the stopwatch still ticking in my palm. I wasn't Ava the background engineer anymore. I wasn't their ghost. I was the line of code they couldn't erase. And for the first time in years, I slept. I didn't attend Brandon's final hearing. I didn't need to. His voice, once the loudest in every room, now cracked under oath, exposed, cornered, and devoid of the brilliance he claimed as his own. His lawyers fumbled through technical explanations they didn't understand, desperately trying to spin the removal of the ethics firewall as an optimization. But the Senate had the code. My code. They had the chain of edits. The timestamps. The access logs. They had everything. I watched it from home, curled in the same desk chair where Obsidian was born. A live stream, high-res and merciless. At one point, a senator asked, and this. Dead switch, initiate? What is that? Brandon paused, blinked, and for the first time in his life, admitted the truth. That wasn't mine. That was the moment everything turned. Not when the system failed, but when he confessed it was never his to begin with. I thought I'd feel triumph. Instead, I felt a clean silence. Not empty. Just finished. 2 weeks later, I walked into my father's storage unit one last time. Dust had settled on everything, old circuit boards, marked up schematics, and photos of us at science fairs I barely remembered. But in the back, I found the one thing I hadn't touched. His notebook. It wasn't filled with formulas or military-grade encryption like I expected. It was full of thoughts. Reflections. Pages and pages of a man trying to teach his daughter how to protect what matters, ethics, clarity, restraint. I used part of the whistleblower settlement to launch the Whitestone Initiative, a scholarship fund for ethical AI design. No PR campaign. No interviews. Just a simple landing page. And a quote across the top, code doesn't lie, but people do. Let them feel that. As for Nexatec, it still exists. Hollowed out. Stripped of government contracts. Once the golden child of military innovation, now a faded logo with lawsuits stacked higher than its ambitions. Brandon disappeared into a non-compete clause and a pending indictment. Olivia hasn't resurfaced. Maybe one day she will. Maybe she won't. And me? I'm still here. Building. Quietly. No stage lights. No applause. Just code that does what it says it will. Transparent. Accountable. Free of theft, free of men who smile when they lie. I wear my father's stopwatch now, not for revenge, but as a metronome. A reminder that time doesn't erase betrayal, but it can measure what you build in its wake. They called me background noise in the room where I built the future. But the truth? I was never just background. I was the silence before the system crashed. Some stories aren't about revenge. They're about reclaiming what was always yours, quietly, completely, and without apology. If this story moved you, subscribe for more. And remember, the silence they ignore might just be the code that ends them.